Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to. I swear to God, one day I'm going to get this right. One day I'm going to get this right. Yo, what's going on, everybody? Dave Loughran from Awesemo.com. And I got a good idea for today's video, right? We're not talking just must draft running backs or wide receivers or tight ends or quarterbacks. We're talking must draft player from every single round. And not just some generic nonsense where I give you good players that everyone was going to draft anyway. But what about guys that have that safety that is going to put you in a quality spot every single week, the consistency that you're looking for? But there are those players out there that have league-changing upside, and that's who we're keying in on today. First 8 rounds, let's make it happen. But before we do, you guys like these videos? If you like the channel, appreciate all of your support. But if you're new, hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Help us get where we need to go so we can keep putting out that free content each and every day here at the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. And hey, while you're at it, hit me up. Follow me at Loughy_D on Twitter, LOUGHY_D. Let's dive into it. It's pretty damn hard to go wrong in the first round, especially the closer you get to September. And I pretty much could have gone with anyone here, even Saquon Barkley now, who's sliding to the very back of the first. So I want to talk about why I think I have a great argument for drafting Alvin Kamara ahead of Derrick Henry. Kamara's being drafted behind Henry pretty much everywhere, but in PPR and half-point PPR leagues, I'm going Kamara all day long. He was the RB1 in both of those formats last year, racking up 21 total touchdowns and 1,688 yards from scrimmage. Henry outproduced him in terms of total yardage, becoming the 8th running back in NFL history to ever record a 2,000-yard rushing season, but no running back has ever achieved this feat twice, let alone in back-to-back seasons. And while he rushed for 17 touchdowns, Henry was essentially unused as a pass catcher with 19 receptions for 114 yards and no scores. Kamara led all backs in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it again in 2021, even with Christian McCaffrey healthy. If you want some seriously wild numbers, I got them for you. Kamara was the RB1 by more than 60 PPR points in the games Michael Thomas missed last year. And we already know that Michael Thomas is set to miss extended time at the beginning of the season. And yeah, I know. Those of you with a keen eye are saying, but Kamara had 6 touchdowns that game and it skews all of those numbers. All right, I got you. In the weeks without Thomas, Kamara finished as the RB2, 1, 10, 10, 3, 2, 16, and 1. So yeah, 5 weeks in the top 3 and only 1 outside the top 10. And in the weeks Thomas did play, Kamara was the RB3, only 0.86 fantasy points per game behind Henry. So here's what I'm saying. Kamara has the highest floor at his position behind only McCaffrey. And even that I'm not so sure of. In PPR, half-point PPR leagues, I'm definitely drafting him ahead of Henry, and I'm not even against going ahead of Cook either. The Saints are extremely limited on pass-catching options, and even lost Jared Cook, who led all receivers/tight ends in red zone targets last year. Assuming Jameis Winston starts, and he should, we should be viewing Kamara as nothing less than the RB3, and maybe even the RB2. How you like that? I haven't spent a ton of time in my videos talking about Darren Waller, so this looks like a good time to make that happen. I know a lot of people who get uncomfortable taking tight ends so early in their drafts, but before you get so gun-shy on Waller in the late second round, let's talk about why he might actually be undervalued with a 22 ADP. We shouldn't just be viewing Waller as the tight end 2 behind Travis Kelce. We should be viewing him as the guy who finished 7th in PPR points among all pass catchers last season and 10th among all skill players. Waller was 16th among all players in half-point PPR leagues last year, so keep that in mind when you're drafting an underdog. But still, he was 4th in receptions, 5th in targets, and 10th in both yards and touchdowns. Not to mention, Waller closed out the season on a run of pure dominance, where not a single player in the league had more fantasy points or yards than the elite tight end. Just imagine what Waller would be able to accomplish if players like Henry Ruggs, John Brown, or Bryan Edwards can make defenses respect them. Derek Carr has already proven that he's capable of running a fantasy-friendly offense, and the chemistry he has with Waller is unmistakable. Waller also went from seeing only 11 red zone targets in 2019 to a whopping 23 in 2020, which not only led the Raiders by a huge margin, but also finished second in the entire league behind Davante Adams. Waller's missed some practice days recently, but there's really nothing to suggest he'll be out for any extended period of time, or that he'll miss any time in the regular season. And he also hasn't missed a single game over the past 2 years. So don't get sketchy about drafting a tight end in the second round is what I'm saying, especially when they were a legitimate top 10 fantasy scorer just 1 year back. I also haven't spent much time talking up Allen Robinson, but that doesn't mean I don't absolutely love this guy in 2021. If you've ever wondered what it's like to play with awful quarterbacks your whole career and still post elite wide receiver totals, just ask Robinson. I'm sure he can tell you some stories. Like in 2015 when he posted 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns with Blake Bortles at the helm. Or in 2019 and 2020 when he played with some combination of Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles, and Chase Daniel and finished as a top 10 receiver in both seasons. That's what gets me so excited about Robinson. He's basically being drafted at his floor under the assumption that Andy Dalton actually starts more than just a handful of games, but has easy top 5 receiver upside if Justin Fields, who has looked remarkable in camp, takes over as the Bears starter. And another thing to love about Robinson is he's been able to put up these great seasons with no real help at the position to take away some defensive attention. So if Darnell Mooney actually does take big strides in his second year, it's only going to make Robinson more appealing. Here's the best part though. Even if Dalton is the starter for most of the year, he has always been the type of player to lock onto his top receiver. Just look at the type of insane target share AJ Green had while the two played together in Cincinnati. Dalton has already been feeding Robinson a ton of targets in camp. So there's little reason to believe the player who was top 3 in targets in back-to-back seasons can't achieve that mark again in 2021. And they should be higher quality targets than previous seasons. Yes, even with Dalton at the helm. Robinson is seriously one of the safest yet highest upside picks in the first 3 rounds. Draft this guy with confidence. Cooper Kupp would definitely be going a lot higher in drafts if his 2020 season wasn't such a disappointment, but that's just the way it goes. He was the wide receiver 4 in 2019 after posting 1,162 yards and 10 touchdowns on 94 receptions and 134 targets. And the Rams haven't exactly added enough depth at the position to think he can't get back to those numbers again. Yeah, they drafted rookie Tutu Atwell in the late second round and brought on Deshaun Jackson, who's 34 years old and hasn't been able to stay on the field for several years. But Robert Woods and Kupp are the clear top options in this offense. And honestly, wouldn't even hurt to have Jackson stay healthy enough to keep a burner on the outside and really open up the middle of the field for Kupp. But what's most important is that Kupp posted near identical targets and receptions to his breakout 2019 year. He just had much fewer touchdowns and less yards thanks to Jared Goff's complete inability to push the ball downfield or create any splash plays for this offense. Matthew Stafford can really open things up, whether it's on the outside or in the middle of the field where Kupp will be operating out of the slot on a lot of his snaps. Goff completed only 13 of his 41 deep ball attempts last year, and 1 of 8 to Kupp, of which 7 were uncatchable. With Sean McVay desperately wanting to get more out of his quarterback, we should expect Stafford to potentially have his most efficient season ever, and a rising tide lifts all boats. I love Kupp because he's at worst a consistent wide receiver 2, and at best a wide receiver 1 like we saw in 2019. And I wouldn't be worried about Stafford's willingness to push the ball downfield hurting Kupp either. Danny Amendola was one of Stafford's favorite targets in Detroit, and he's nowhere near as talented as Kupp. If you haven't signed up for Underdog Fantasy yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Seriously, best ball leagues are the greatest thing to fantasy football since PPR came around. I've been drafting a ton over there, from the puppy, which is $5 to enter, $100,000 the first, or the Best Ball Mania, $3.5 million, over $1 million the first, the biggest best ball contest ever ran. It doesn't matter what style of player you are, what your bankroll looks like. They got something for everyone over at Underdog Fantasy. And when you sign up using the promo code Awesemo, that's AWESEMO, you'll get $25 upon your first deposit. There's no reason not to check it out. You're absolutely going to love it. It works flawlessly, whether you're on an iPad, iPhone, desktop, laptop, it doesn't matter. UnderdogFantasy.com. Use that promo code Awesemo. Get $25 when you sign up and deposit, and go win yourself some money. Diontae Johnson had one of the craziest seasons last year. If you remove the game against Houston where he suffered a concussion and only played 19 snaps, and the game against Philly where he managed only 6 snaps thanks to a back injury, Johnson was targeted double-digit times in 10 of the 13 games he played from start to finish. And that's including a game against the Bills where Mike Tomlin benched him after dropping multiple passes, and he only played 28 snaps there too. It was such a mixed bag for Johnson, though. He averaged 10.8 targets per game in the weeks where he played from start to finish, but also led the league in drops with 14. He also posted a pedestrian mark of 10.5 yards per reception. But despite all of the drops, Ben Roethlisberger just kept looking his way. It was quite remarkable, really. But the truth is, while Johnson dropped 14 balls, he was absolutely peppered with targets. So while his drop rate was bad, it wasn't quite as egregious as it looks on the surface. Either way, Look at what Roethlisberger's been able to do with his top receivers throughout his career. This is a crowded receiving corps, and I really like Chase Claypool to have a breakout year after an impressive rookie campaign. But Johnson is still the number one in this offense and will continue to see an insane amount of volume even if the Steelers' crazy pass-heavy approach from last year is curtailed a bit in 2021. Once again, we're looking at a super safe fifth-round target with upside to crush his ADP as the 25th receiver off the board. Volume is king in fantasy football, and across 17 games, even if Johnson saw 2 fewer targets per week than he did in 2020, he'd still be looking at 150 targets for the year, and he's only going into year 3. Sometimes players just fall far enough down the board that we need to start paying close attention to them. Myles Gaskin is one of those players. Earlier in the summer, Gaskin was being drafted as high as the early 5th round. Now he's fallen all the way down to the middle to late 6th. That seems like too steep of a fall for someone who is the clear lead back in this offense. Gaskin is the cheapest 3-down back you're going to draft. And after Gaskin goes, you're going to be looking at all timeshare backs or upside backs in speculative spots where their role is still entirely undefined. I have nothing against grabbing some of those backs, especially in best ball leagues, but Gaskin's role is defined in Miami, especially after the Dolphins decided to forego drafting a running back until the 7th round and only added Malcolm Brown in free agency. Don't look at what Gaskin did as far as his season totals go because he only played 10 games. Instead, look at what he did in the 8 games since taking over as Miami's clear top running back in week 3. In those weeks, Gaskin averaged 15.8 carries and 4.8 targets per game, coming in right around 20 looks each week. He also saw 36 carries inside the red zone, 21 inside the 10, and 11 inside the 5, which is pretty damn great for playing only 10 games. He may not be the best pure runner in football, and maybe Brown will steal some red zone opportunities too, but given that we're drafting Gaskin in the 6th round, you'd be hard-pressed not to love him here on an up-and-coming Miami offense. Gaskin makes for a perfect fit in the draft builds where you're waiting to draft a second running back until later, but don't want to get burned by having a backup or pure timeshare back in your starting lineup come week 1. If you're looking to add a piece of the Buccaneers' high-octane offense, but don't feel great about spending a pick on Mike Evans or Chris Godwin in the 3rd or 4th round, there's no better way to get exposure than drafting Antonio Brown. And let me tell you something, depending on where you're drafting, you'll be able to land Brown way after the 7th. The crazy thing about Brown, though, is in the 8 weeks he played, he was 13th in targets, tied with Mike Evans, and 8 ahead of Chris Godwin, 12th in receptions, 21st in yards, and 13th in touchdowns. And we're talking about a player who didn't even join the team until week 9 and played way fewer snaps than both Evans and Godwin in the weeks that he was active. Now, I'm not suggesting we should be drafting Brown ahead of those guys, obviously, but I am suggesting that maybe the gap isn't nearly as big as it is on draft boards right now. I know Brown is 33 years old, but he's only played 9 games over the last 2 years, which should have clearly preserved his body a bit. And between 2014 and 2019, this is crazy. Brown was the wide receiver 1, 2, and 5. Just insane. Obviously, we won't get that type of production again from Brown, and it's worth pointing out that Evans and Godwin were still the higher upside receivers from a yards per target and an air yard standpoint when Brown was active. But this offense was so good last year that there's no reason to believe Brady can't support 3 quality receivers, especially when one of them is being drafted in the 7th round and sometimes way later. Remember, Underdog's ADP is way sharper than a lot of other sites, and that's what I'm using for this video. Across 16 games, Brown was pacing 90 receptions, 122 targets, 966 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That would have put him inside the top 15 at his position in PPR formats. I'm not going to get greedy with those expectations, and I'm not saying he's a top 15 receiver, but a top 25 season is definitely in play, and he's being drafted nowhere close to that range. Take some shots here. Worst case scenario is you get a safe, consistent player in Brown with a ton of upside if everything goes right. Raheem Mostert is being drafted a round and a half behind rookie Trey Sermon right now. Basically, he's being drafted as the second back in what we know is going to be a timeshare. But so far in training camp, Mostert has been the lead back in San Francisco, albeit only by a little bit. What's really interesting about Mostert, though, is he's being treated like a running back who, when healthy, hasn't been awesome. Here's a fun stat for you. Mostert had both of the fastest plays in the NFL last year, reaching over 23 miles per hour on an 80-yard touchdown run in week 2 and 22.7 miles per hour on a 76-yard touchdown reception in week 1. The guy's got some legitimate upside if he can stay on the field, and that's definitely a big if. But the risk is very much worth the reward in the 8th or even 9th round where you're drafting him as a flex or even a bench player. Sermon is definitely going to be involved a lot early on after the 49ers traded up to draft him in the 3rd round. But with this team finally being healthy again, I'd expect them to function a lot more like they did in 2019 during their Super Bowl run, where Shanahan ran the ball 32.1 times per game with a 51.4% run play percentage, both of which were second highest in football behind only the Ravens. And Lamar Jackson saw a ton of those carries in Baltimore, but that's not going to be the case if Garoppolo's at the helm. Hell, even if Trey Lance starts, though, his dual threat ability could just open up more holes for the running backs, even if they see a few less carries. Ultimately, Mostert is going mostly ignored on a team that will absolutely emphasize the run game, should be able to control time of possession now that their quarterback, pass catchers, and defense are all healthy, and has a 10.5 game win total and one of the softest schedules in the league. I love Mostert here. Even if the 29-year-old back poses some injury risk in 2021, if he stays healthy, he's not only going to be safe, but also possess some of the best upside this late in the draft. That'll do it for today's video. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and head over to Awesemo.com for all of your fantasy football needs. Check out all the tools we got going on over there and all of the DFS content, both of which are headed up by the #1 ranked DFS player in the world, Awesemo himself. Until next time, peace.